And so some colonists were actually pelting one of the local military colonels with snowballs, and were really angry at him and basically harassing the guy. In that day, because the fire department was not as efficient as it is now, if someone says the term fire, then the common practice was everybody says the term fire to alert that there's a fire and we need to get water to it. So somebody says during, if you think about the meeting, the group meeting, this one army colonel's getting pelted, his other army buddies show up and give him some support. They've all got muskets. Here's this crowd of 30, 40, 50 different people, and they're yelling and screaming and hollering at this particular redcoat. They lower their weapons, and they're like, get back. Stop hurting us, harassing us. Somebody shouts, fire. So it's the American, well, the colonists, that means water's coming. To the soldiers, that means unload your weapon. So sure enough, some of the guys, they fired. And so they killed 5 people that day. That was 1770. Fast forward, that was March 5th, 1770. Every year, 71, 72, 73, on March 5th at South Meeting House?
Old South Meeting House.
Old South Meeting House, that church. There would be an oration where they would talk about this is what King George and his government is doing to us. We need to rebel. We need to own our own people. We need to be able to represent ourselves. For 100 years, the colonists have been taxing themselves, and this is the key. Since the colonists showed up, and from the time they showed up to that point in time, they had been taxing themselves. The British had been making all their money in the Indies. They were fine. They didn't really even consider the colonies as any point of revenue. It was such a small group of people that it was almost nothing. They were making millions of dollars out of the Indies. Then George spends all of his money with his war with France, and he says, I need money. I need cash. How am I going to get it? I know. I'm going to start taxing the colonists. You can check me anytime you want, because you've probably taken this more recently than I have. Anyway, and so now the colonists are getting taxed, and in 1773, British Parliament passes the Tea Party Act. The Tea Act. There's another term for it, something. Anyway, they're going to start taxing the tea. The fun fact, John Hancock, the big signature on the Constitution, John Hancock was a merchant. He made all of his money smuggling. Part of the law for the American colony was that we only did business with Britain. John Hancock said, I'm not doing that. He smuggled money and goods from France, Spain, whomever. John Hancock was a rich guy, but he was basically an illegal trader. He did other things probably well, but he was one of the main people that financed the early revolt. And so the Tea Party shows up. Tea Party, I said it again. The Tea Act is passed by Congress, and so the problem that the Americans had with it, they didn't have a problem with the tax. They actually were willing to pay. They've been paying taxes. They had no problem providing revenue. Their issue was, I'm being taxed without representation. Their decision was, so for 3 years they've been remembering and hearing about the massacre that happened in which 5 people were killed. For 3 years they've been hearing about it. Now Parliament passes this Tea Act. We're getting taxed without representation. They had an issue. The Tea Party happens later that year, December 14th, 15th, 16th. Finally on the 16th, they had the Tea Party Act, Tea Party, and they dumped about $1 million of British tea into the harbor. So, the Tea Party got its name from that event because the Tea Party, today's terms, revolted against what we've seen out of basically poor choices out of Congress about fiscal responsibility and how we as Americans are taxed. We got tired of being government with out-of-control spending and government that was basically not doing their job once they got to office. So they picked up the name Tea Party to reflect at that point in time.
Isn't it also an acronym?
Nope. If it is, I'm not aware of it. Oh, what you're talking about. Yes, some groups do form taxed enough already. Some groups created that acronym after the fact, but it wasn't derived from it. So the focus of the Constitution, it's a two-dimensional contract. One is that it's compact across states, and two, it forms different levels of government, so judiciary, legislation, and executive, and giving those different parts of the government different power. The key being is that the Republican form of government has controlled power both at the federal level and that it duplicates that at the state level. That's why, like in Texas, Texas has a House. It has House of Congress, Senate, government. It mimics almost exactly what's held at the federal level. Most states operate the same way. They've got that same kind of balance of power format. You'll see that very common. That was done by design so that not at any particular level of government or in any one place where all the decision made and was power too concentrated to allow for corruption that we couldn't get away from. The Federalist is a document that was a sell job by Hamilton and a couple other guys trying to tell the different states that, look, you need to come together and form a united government. The tone of the people at the time was, look, we just came out from under King George. He was horrible. We know what happens when we have one centralized government. Why would we want to do that again? They trusted George Washington. George Washington had power, stepped away from power. They knew who George Washington was, and they were willing to live with him and maybe a couple other people who were strong leaders, but they had no idea what would come in the future generations. And so the Tea Party holds to the Federalist as a document and point because the Federalist document talks about too much power in one place, and it defines what responsible government looks like. The message of the Federalist is trying to tell states to come together. We've already got that, obviously. That's not the point. The point of the Federalist documents are that they discuss what happens when you put government geographically in one place. That's one of the messages. And it's kind of weird because they say, look, if you have government in one place geographically, it's going to be really easy to become corrupt. What do we have today? One of my professors made a comment that in 2010, the dollar amount of money being lobbied on Capitol Hill per month was $500 million. $500 million per month in 2010. You don't think that's buying influence? That's buying a lot of influence. You wonder why the Health Care Act, so Obama's health care plan, whether or not you're for or against it, the reason it's not enacted right now is that it was agreed that it be pushed out to 2014. Why was that? Because the pharmaceutical industry spends gazillions, hundreds of millions of dollars to give themselves time to remove that piece of legislation. They lobbied against Capitol Hill, trying to get the politicians on Capitol Hill to push that document being enacted out so that they would have time to figure out how they were going to kill it. That's what happens when you get centralized government in one place. You give people easy access to get to them. And that was one of the messages that's in the Federalist.